Adulting is hard. Your vibe doesn't have to be. Welcome to Adulting Candle Company, where self-care smells amazing. From stress-melting wax melts to crystals that calm the chaos, we've got the tools to help you glow up your grown-up life. Shop now at www.adultingcandleco.com, because if you're gonna pay bills and fold laundry, you deserve to do it in the scent of lavender, vanilla, and victory. I'm Henny B, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Hooked on the podcast? Now you can hold the stories in your hands. World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches Volume 1 is now out on Amazon. 10 unforgettable tales of resilience, loss, and hope from the people forever changed by war. Available in paperback and on Kindle. Today's episode, Intercepted, Part 1. Britain. Arthur Bennett was bored. The tedium of his job made him that way. Even though the world was on fire, he was too old and walked with a pronounced limp that made him unable to join the fray. At the age of 35, he had to find other ways to serve his country. So when war broke out over 3 years ago, he quit his teaching job at Cornell and joined the government as an aide to the Member of Parliament, or MP, of Cheltenham. Since then, he had been a paper pusher, dictating memos and running them to other MPs and other agencies. It was shaping up to be another uneventful day. Even the weather outside seemed indifferent. No snow, no rain, just a flat, gray January sky beyond the window of the cramped office he shared with 2 other aides. The office was quiet, as it always was when his fellow aide Thomas Ellery was drafting a speech for their boss, MP Reginald Harrow. Today, Harrow was to stand before the House of Commons and voice his objection to women's suffrage, a topic that had stirred considerable debate of late. Thomas had always asked for complete silence when he wrote, and that was because he was self-aware of the fact that he was easily distracted. Arthur, being bored, still quietly tapped his fingers on the desk. Fidgeting in some manner was always a part of him. He did not know why. His body was just always in motion in some way or another. There was a racket from just beyond the door in the hallway. This caused Thomas to break his concentration, which in turn made him slam his pen down onto the oak desk. It also caught Arthur's attention. What was that? No idea, but I lost my damn train of thought, Thomas answered in frustration. At that moment, the door opened and in ran Miles Hanford, the press liaison whom they also shared the small cramped office with. Arthur could tell that he was obviously winded. Did you just run a marathon, Miles? What was that noise out there? Thomas asked. Miles raised his hand, calling for silence as he bent over, still trying to catch his breath. After a moment, he was finally able to speak. The floor is wet. I fell out there. But Arthur, you're needed. Right now. Harrow is in a meeting with the Admiralty of the Navy, and he needs something from Room 40. Something big just happened, I guess. Arthur had a moment of confusion. Do I interrupt the meeting? Wait in his office? What? It was Thomas who answered. Just go into the meeting. You're cleared just like they are. It's probably a need-to-know thing. Miles pointed at Thomas. That. The halls of the first floor of the Admiralty building were well known to him by now. He had been here since he started. Generally, MPs worked in the Palace of Westminster. However, during wartime, MPs who worked in intelligence, such as Harrow, operated from the Admiralty, a sprawling warren of stone-floored corridors, map-lined offices, and secured meeting rooms where information moved faster than people did. The meeting room was easy to find. It was situated across the hall from the office that Harrow would utilize until the war ended. Arthur tapped lightly on the door, turned the knob, and entered. The conversation inside was disorganized. It seemed everybody was talking at once, and, as it was, Arthur could not tell the subject. It seemed to take forever for the commotion to die down and for Harrow to finally notice that he had entered. But once he did, he silenced the room by simply raising his hand. Harrow addressed Arthur. "Bennett, please take a seat." With all the seats around the table taken, Arthur took a seat against the wall on a hard wooden chair that was somehow more comfortable than the chair in his office. He looked around the room and recognized nobody, except his boss, of course. Harrow made quick introductions around the room. To his right was Commodore Alastair Wyndham, a senior officer for the Naval Intelligence. Across from him sat Sir Percival Evington, an assistant undersecretary for the Foreign Office. Next to him sat Captain Lionel Redford from Naval Operations, and rounding out the meeting was Colonel Desmond Tilbury from the War Liaison Office. Lastly, he introduced Arthur to them. Arthur had attended meetings before, but only the lower-level kind. Never anything involving intelligence, and never alongside figures of this stature. Then Harrow got to it. "Bennett, what we discussed does not leave this room. I need to trust you now more than ever. Can I do that?" This made Arthur nervous, but any chance to prove himself he would take. "Yes, sir." About 20 minutes ago, our meeting on... He didn't finish his thought, for he was abruptly interrupted by Colonel Tilbury. "That meeting's contents are irrelevant, sir." "Right, irrelevant." Harrow continued. "We weren't told details, son, but there's something going on in room 40. Something apparently pretty big. They have a package for us, and I need you to go retrieve it. I'm trusting you not to read the contents or even discuss anything you hear while in that room or this one." Again, Colonel Tilbury spoke up. "I have to object here, with respect. He is a clerk, an aide. He is not cleared or qualified to even go near room 40, let alone go inside." Alastair Wyndham from Naval Intelligence was the next to speak up. "He's more than qualified and cleared. In fact, he's done this before." "You've done your homework as usual, Wyndham," Harrow replied. "My job is to know everyone who is cleared, so yes, I did my homework on all three of your aides." Tilbury spoke again. "I still have to disagree, but if you're hell-bent on sending this man, then so be it." Harrow nodded in his direction. "Your objection has been noted." Arthur turned to leave, but then realized something. "Sir, where is room 40? Arthur made his way to the uppermost floor of the building. That was all the guidance he received from Harrow, because even Harrow, or the other men in the room, knew the exact location of room 40. This floor, like all of the floors within the Admiralty building, was like a maze. He knew the first floor well, and the second floor a little, but he had never been on this level, and it was set up vastly different. He walked along halls and down corridor after corridor looking for a door marked room 40. He could not find it, and to make matters worse, he didn't see a single person on the floor to ask. He was almost at his wit's end when, finally, a gentleman emerged from a distant door at the end of a corridor he had already searched. He broke into a brisk walk to intercept the man before he could disappear down yet another corridor. "Excuse me, sir," he yelled. The man stopped, turning around and instantly smiled and yelled back, "You must be Arthur Bennett. I was just coming to look for you." Arthur reached the man and he put his hand out. "Yes, I'm Bennett." The man reciprocated and they shook hands. "Nigel de Grey. We were told you were coming down." "I couldn't find the room, sir." "Understandable. It's an unmarked room and sealed. Follow me, please." He was led straight to the door the man had just emerged from, a door that Arthur was sure he had walked past already more than once. Once inside, Arthur saw just how deceiving the Admiralty building could be. A space labeled as a single room was anything but. It was a sprawling network of adjoining offices and work areas. The main room was packed wall to wall with desks, tables, filing cabinets, and stacked papers. The telegraph operators, clerks, and intelligence officers moved in hushed coordination. The walls were lined with maps, naval charts, and communication logs. One map caught Arthur's attention immediately, pinned with red thread and annotated in thick pencil, "Submarine Routes." Nigel de Grey politely spurred him on. "This way." Arthur followed. Everyone at every desk and table he walked past seemed so busy. How could a room this busy be this quiet? Is everyone here like Thomas? Probably. They approached a closed office door. De Grey turned the knob and motioned for Arthur to enter first, which he did. Inside, he saw yet another table filled with papers and walls adorned with maps. One map in particular caught his eye. It was of the United States, and there were large red circles around the states of New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas, and a black circle, large and pronounced, around Mexico. Another man was also in the room, head down and going over notes. He looked up. "You must be Arthur Bennett. I'm William Montgomery." The two shook hands. "Have a seat. It's almost ready." The two men conferred together, talking in hushed tones. Arthur could not understand what exactly was being said, but some words jumped out at him. At one point, he could have sworn that he heard them say, "The United States had to enter the war now." De Grey pointed to several documents as they spoke, each one marked or annotated, and each carefully added to a growing stack beside them. The papers were crisp, some with penciled notes in the margins, others stamped with official markings. Then, in one swift and practiced motion, Montgomery gathered the pile, slid it into a thick envelope, and handed it to Arthur. "Get this to Commodore Wyndham. I believe he's meeting with Harold right now." Arthur realized that Montgomery could be commanding when needed. "Yes, sir." And he was on his way. It took him 10 minutes to find his way back through the winding hallways, down 2 floors, and back to the meeting room. The men inside were loud and boisterous. He could hear them laughing and trading jokes through the wooden door. But when he stepped inside, the tone shifted. The room fell silent. Faces straightened. Military composure returned. Arthur walked over and handed Harrow the envelope. Harrow took it without a word, studying the thickness of the packet for a long moment. Arthur could feel the tension in the room again. Nobody spoke. They all waited. Arthur was not sure if he should stay or leave. He edged towards the door. That's when Harrow looked up. "Shut the door, Bennett, and please take a seat." Arthur sat and looked around as the other men shrugged their shoulders and nodded at each other in surprise. Yes, Arthur had clearance, but even this may not be within his need to know. The moment passed and they all returned their attention to Harrow as he opened the envelope and removed the contents. He read in silence. It seemed as if nobody in the room even dared move. When finished, he put the contents down on the table and without saying a word produced a small notepad and a pen. He started to write. Still, nobody spoke. When finished, he looked straight at Arthur. "Bennett, I need you to fetch the men on this note. Get them in here as soon as you can." Arthur stood and took the note. As he made his way towards the door, he heard Harrow speak in a hushed tone. One word struck out to him. Mexico. Arthur's first stop was back to room 40. The first 2 names on Harrow's list were de Grey and Montgomery. It took some convincing just to get in the door. It took more to convince them to leave the confinements of their intelligence room and join a meeting. But the next names on the list made him pause, not just nervous, intimidated. He had never met them, never even seen them in passing. Men like that didn't cross paths with men like him. First, Sea Lord John Jellicoe and Edward Carson, the First Lord of the Admiralty. Summoning them to a meeting felt absurd, like asking the sun and the moon to report to your office. But that's what the note said, so that's what he had to do. Finding their offices was its own challenge. The Admiralty was notorious for not using nameplates or signs. This always led to some confusion. It was nothing but corridors, sharp turns, and too many closed doors. He asked 2 clerks for help and got 2 different answers. By the time he found Carson's office, his nerves were close to frayed. The man at the desk, A young officer, sharp uniform, unreadable face, looked at Arthur like he had wandered into the wrong place entirely. Arthur cleared his throat and held out the folded note. "This is for the First Lord. It's from MP Reginald Harrow. He said it's urgent." The officer didn't take it right away. His eyes moved up and down. Arthur's coat, his shoes, his face. "Who did you say you were?" "I'm his aide, Arthur Bennett." Still, the man hesitated. Then, with the slowest of movements, he took the note, rose from his chair, and disappeared behind a door. Arthur was left alone in the hall. Seconds dragged, then minutes. He wasn't sure if the man had even gone in. For all he knew, he was being laughed at on the other side of the door. Eventually, the door opened and the officer returned. No expression. "He'll be there in 20 minutes. Arthur nodded, unsure if he should say thank you or just walk away. He chose the latter. Jellicoe's office was worse. Another long hall, another desk, another young man in uniform. But this one wasn't cold. He was skeptical. "You want to see the Sea Lord?" Arthur didn't like the way he said it, like the very idea was ridiculous. "I have a note. It's from Harrow. It's not a request." He said it with more confidence than he felt. The man looked at the paper in Arthur's hand and didn't move to take it. Then, finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry a dozen other interruptions with it, he took the paper and disappeared through a tall, silent door. Arthur waited. Longer this time. He shifted his weight, stared at the carpet, and then ceiling. He was just about to knock when the door opened again. "The Sea Lord will join them in an hour." That was all he said before turning and returning to his desk. Arthur nodded again and made his way back down the corridor. It had been 6 hours. 6 hours since he returned to the meeting room and was summarily dismissed and told to just sit outside the door, in case he was needed again. He was hungry and thirsty, but dared not to move. Both Edward Carson, the First Lord of the Admiralty, and First Sea Lord John Jellicoe had arrived together about an hour and a half after they had been summoned, and since then the voices in the room varied from quiet hushes to loud outbursts. What was going on in there, he thought to himself. The door opened and a voice quietly summoned him. "Bennett, please come in." Arthur stood and made his way back into the meeting room. It smelled now of sweat, and the tension in the atmosphere seemed like it could be cut with a knife. Once inside, Arthur quickly noticed that there was no seating available. He walked across the room and sat halfway on a window ledge. It was Edward Carson who spoke. "Mr. Bennett, what you're going to hear right now is classified, and it's imperative that all the protocols that come with your clearance level are to be followed to the letter. Is that understood?" This was serious, Arthur thought to himself. "Yes, sir." Carson continued. "Harrow here has told us that in the past you've been trustworthy, and we're counting on that now." "Yes, sir," Arthur said again. He said it sharply, almost excitedly. Carson stood from his chair and put his hands behind his back. He started to pace around the room. All eyes were affixed on him, including Arthur's. But it was Harrow who spoke. "Bennett, earlier today you went to room 40 to see what was going on. Well, it turns out that de Grey, Montgomery, and their team have uncovered some correspondence from a man in Germany." He stopped for a moment. "His name escapes me." It was Montgomery who assisted. "Zimmerman, Arthur Zimmerman. He's the State Secretary for Foreign Affairs in Germany." Harrow nodded at Montgomery. "Yes, Zimmerman. This man, Zimmerman, has sent a message to the German ambassador to the United States, Johann Heinrich von Bernstorff. That message is to be passed along to the German ambassador in Mexico, a man named Heinrich von Eckhart. In short, Germany wants Mexico to wage war against the United States. Their hope, it seems, is that if America is busy fighting Mexico, they will not join us over here in Europe. If Mexico chooses to follow this path, then Germany promises to support them in their cause, and, in return, Mexico will regain the territories that are now the states of New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas." Arthur felt faint and heard himself say, "What?" He had not intended to speak. It was purely involuntary. It was Jellicoe who spoke next. "We've told you all of this because we need you to retrieve Lloyd George. He must come here as soon as possible. And now, knowing what you know, you understand the stakes and the level of secrecy this demands." It took Arthur a few moments to process everything that he had just heard, and to fully grasp the weight of the task that he'd been given. Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, the most powerful man in the kingdom aside from the king himself, and now it was Arthur's job to summon him. The contents of that message could change the entire course of the war. If America joined the fight, it could shift the balance in favor of the Allies. He knew the United States had been neutral since the war began, and he also knew that every major European power, including Britain, had quietly hoped for American involvement. They may very well get it now. Arthur moved towards the door when Carson spoke again. "Here," and held out an envelope. "This goes to Lloyd George himself, not an aide, not a secretary, the Prime Minister only. We will call ahead and tell him you're coming." Arthur took the envelope and left. As Arthur rode his bike out of Whitehall and towards 10 Downing Street, his thoughts swirled in his head. As he rode through the streets, Arthur kept a careful eye on the cobblestones below. Patches of ice lingered in the shadows, and he found himself swerving often to avoid them, as well as the stubborn pockets of snow that had survived the afternoon sun. It was late evening now. The street lamps had begun to glow, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, and the city's energy had shifted into something quieter. Arthur could only hope that Lloyd George, a man he had never met, was still in his office. What if someone had called ahead, but he had already gone home? 5 minutes later, he was leaning his bike against the walls of what looked like a townhouse that was being guarded by a constable. He checked the address, 10, and then the street sign nearby, Downing. This was the right place. The constable approached him. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man was curt and all business. Nervously, he spit out, "I'm Arthur Bennett. I was sent by MP Harrow and Edward Carson to see Lloyd George." The constable relaxed noticeably. "Ah, yes, we were told of your arrival. Please." Then he motioned towards the front door. Arthur stepped inside and the door closed behind him with a heavy click. He had entered what looked nothing like a seat of government and everything like an old, well-kept London townhouse. The air was warm, the lighting soft, lamplight, not harsh fixtures. The narrow hallway in front of him was paneled in dark wood and lined with portraits he didn't recognize. Thick carpet muffled his footsteps. A wide staircase curled upward to the left, its banister polished to a dull shine. It smelled faintly of fireplace smoke and something rich. Leather, maybe, or beeswax polish. The kind of scent that clung to important places. There was no front desk, no reception hall buzzing with secretaries. Just a man in a waistcoat seated behind a modest side table halfway down the corridor flipping through a ledger. He looked up at Arthur without any surprise. "You're the one from the Admiralty?" Arthur nodded. "Yes, Arthur Bennett." The man checked something in the ledger and stood. "Wait here, I'll announce you." And just like that, he disappeared through a side door, leaving Arthur alone beneath the watchful gaze of a dozen oil portraits, none of them who looked particularly welcoming. A few moments later, the man returned. Follow me, please." Arthur followed him through the door and into an office. A fireplace blazed and the dry warmth hit him in the face. The room was less ornate than he expected. Simple wood-paneled walls, heavy curtains, and lamps casting soft pools of light. There were shelves of books and stacks of documents, but no grandeur, just purpose. His eyes settled on the large mahogany desk near the fireplace, and the man behind it. David Lloyd George looked up from his work. He was almost hidden behind a wall of folders and papers arranged in controlled chaos, yet nothing about him seemed disorganized. There was a sharpness in his eyes, a weight in his presence. When he stood, Arthur noticed the silver hair, the posture of a man used to command, and the kind of authority that didn't need volume to be felt. Arthur cleared his throat. This is more like a house and not an office. Lloyd George gave a small smile. Ah, then you must not know much about number 10. It's both. the official residence and office of the Prime Minister. I work here, and I live here. He stepped around the desk. Now then, what brings you? Arthur produced the envelope he had been given and handed it to the Prime Minister. Walking back behind his desk as he opened the envelope, he sat back down and removed the contents. He unfolded the document. Arthur could see his eyes widen as he read. Lloyd George looked up at Arthur. This is real? Sir, yes. Harrow, Jellicoe, and Carson, they've been meeting with men from Room 40 all afternoon and into this evening. I've been instructed to request your presence at the Admiralty to discuss it. Without another word, Lloyd George stood, walked around his desk, and brushed past him. He opened the door and addressed the men at the desk situated just beyond the door. Anderson, grab my jacket and go ready the car. He then turned his attention back to Arthur. Did you walk? I rode my bike, sir. Leave it here. You ride with me. It had been over a week since his late evening dash to 10 Downing Street. He had brought the Prime Minister to the meeting room and was abruptly dismissed. In the weeks since, there seemed to be nothing but meetings that he was not invited to. This was not a surprise. He was merely an aide to the MP. But with Harrow focused on the issue at hand, that left Arthur, Thomas, and Miles with very little to do. So the three aides huddled in their small office day after day, awaiting tasks and orders. For the first few days, Thomas attempted to pry information from Arthur, but he had been thwarted at every turn. Being 35 came with a level of maturity that understood that need to know and secrecy were vastly important, especially when it came to situations such as this. That was not to say he felt Thomas or Miles couldn't be trusted. It was merely the fact that he had been tasked with keeping his mouth shut. There was a quiet knock on the door. All three looked up to see Harrow standing in the doorway. Arthur, a moment? Yes, sir. Harrow led Arthur to his office. Once inside, Harrow sat behind his desk and Arthur stood on the other side of it. I'm sure you're curious as to how things are moving along with the Zimmerman information, he began. Arthur sat down. I try not to dwell on it, sir. I was told what I needed to know to get the task at hand completed. Harrow continued, and you did well. Over the past week, we debated on how to get the information to the Americans without us tipping our hand at our code-breaking capabilities. Deliberation after deliberation, argument after argument. Well, now it's done. Arthur didn't speak, just waited. Harrow stood and stepped to the window, hands behind his back. There's hesitation on their end, understandably. It's a bold claim, and bold claims demand proof. He turned now, facing Arthur directly. That's where we come in. This piqued Arthur's interest. We, sir? A small team, Harrow continued. Men from Room 40, Naval Intelligence, a few from the Foreign Office. He paused. And us. Us, sir? You and I? Arthur tried to swallow, but found his mouth dry. We sail tomorrow, Harrow continued. We'll meet with officials in Washington, present the original cipher, explain how we got it, show them that the threat to Mexico is not hypothetical. Arthur nodded slowly. The magnitude of it settled in like a slow fog. Then Harrow added casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, You and the other aides need to pack. Arthur opened his mouth, unsure what to say. Do not tell them anything they do not need to know, Harrow added, moving back behind his desk. I will fill them in. He looked up one last time, met Arthur's eyes. We are going to America. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. If this episode stayed with you, if it stirred something quiet or left you in stillness, share it, follow the show, leave a rating, help keep these stories alive. Our first collection now lives on Kindle. Search World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, Volume 1 in your Kindle app, and carry these echoes with you. For glimpses behind the curtain and stories between the stories, join me on Instagram at WWIPod_HennyB. And if you'd like to see your name in the credits, become a producer. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/World War I Stories and help power the next tale into existence. Thank you for walking back in time with me.